First person who realized something was wrong wasn't an auditor. It was the bartender. He leaned across the hotel bar during my father's Christmas party and asked if my brother wanted his usual whiskey put on the Hawthorne account again. Andrew froze for maybe half a second. Tiny pause. Most people wouldn't have noticed it. I did because I'd spent 36 years watching my brother recover from almost getting caught. Then he laughed and said, "Jesus, man, not so loud." Everybody around him smiled like it was normal rich guy banter. The bartender smiled too. Moved on. But I remember looking down at the drink in my hand and thinking, what the hell is Hawthorne? 3 months later, federal investigators were inside our offices copying hard drives while my father sat in a conference room refusing to remove his cufflinks, even after his attorney asked him twice. If you asked my family when things started falling apart, they'd probably tell you it was the investigation. That isn't true. Things started rotting years earlier. We just had better lighting back then. My name is Claire Bishop. I'm the younger of Martin Bishop's 2 children. My father built Bishop and Reed Capital in Nashville sometime in the 90s, when men could still become financially powerful just by sounding calm in expensive restaurants. By the time I joined the firm, the company had 27 employees, regional political connections, and one of those downtown offices with glass walls people mistake for competence. I handled operations, which sounds boring because it mostly is. Compliance reviews, vendor approvals, regulatory filings. The quiet work that keeps wealthy men from accidentally emailing crimes to each other. Andrew handled clients. My father called him a natural relationship builder, which mostly meant older investors liked drinking with him and younger employees knew not to get stuck alone with him after conferences. Nobody ever said that last part directly. That's not how offices like ours work. People hint. Women warn each other in bathrooms. HR pretends not to notice patterns unless somebody important gets embarrassed publicly. Andrew had this way of making every interaction sound slightly confidential. Hand on your shoulder. Voice lowered half a step. Like the two of you understood something other people didn't. Clients loved it. My father loved it more. I spent years telling myself I wasn't bothered by the favoritism because being bothered by it felt childish at 36. But once you start paying attention, it's hard to stop. Andrew got the River office. Andrew got introduced at conferences before people with actual credentials. Andrew got forgiven for things that would have turned into professional concerns if anyone else had done them. Meanwhile, I became the dependable one. Families say that like it's praise. Most of the time it means you clean up quietly enough that people stop seeing the cleaning. A few weeks after the Christmas party, I started reviewing quarterly entertainment expenses because one of our outside accounts kept tripping internal thresholds. At first, it looked ordinary. Private dinners, golf memberships, travel reimbursements, the usual executive sludge. Then Hawthorne appeared again. Hawthorne Advisory, Hawthorne Group, Hawthorne Holdings once. Same wire destination, different names. The invoices were weirdly vague, lots of language about strategic cultivation and investor experience continuity. One invoice billed $90,000 for legacy transition support. I remember actually snorting when I read that, not because it was funny, because the wording sounded like somebody trying to expense a monarchy. I pulled the vendor files. The contact number routed to a prepaid business line. The mailing address belonged to a UPS store outside Atlanta. The tax forms looked technically correct until you sat with them too long. A typo here, for inconsistencies. one document using a different font halfway through. The kind of mistakes people make when they've spent years getting away with things. I should have escalated it immediately. That's the clean version of the story. The uglier version is I waited. Partly because I didn't yet understand what I was looking at. Partly because once suspicion enters a family business, every memory starts rearranging itself, and you become afraid of where your brain might stop. That Thursday, my husband Eli found me sitting at the kitchen counter with printed spreadsheets spread beside an untouched bowl of chili. "You eating that?" I said I wasn't hungry. He looked at the paperwork. "Work stuff?" "Maybe." He waited a second, then, "You've been saying maybe a lot lately." I got irritated immediately. Not at him. At the fact he noticed. That happened more as things got worse. Small questions started feeling invasive because I was spending so much energy pretending everything still made sense. The first real crack came 2 weeks later. One of Andrew's clients died unexpectedly. Older guy named Richard Vale. Heart attack on a golf course in Arizona. Andrew called the widow personally. I could hear him through the wall from my office. Soft voice, patient pauses, asking whether she'd eaten anything that day. If you only knew him from moments like that, you'd think he was decent. That's what complicated everything. Bad people are easier when they're bad consistently. Halfway through the call, I opened the Vale account reconciliation. 3 unauthorized disbursements tied to Hawthorne over the previous year. Just under reporting thresholds. I sat there listening to my brother comfort a grieving widow while staring at evidence he'd siphoned money from her household. And honestly, for a few seconds my brain tried to protect him anyway. Maybe he planned to replace it. Maybe it wasn't what it looked like. Maybe... That's another ugly thing families do. They turn intelligence into delay. That night I drank 2 glasses of wine faster than I should have and searched Hawthorne through corporate filings until almost 1 in the morning. Eventually I found the overlap. A shell company partially tied to Andrew's longtime friend, Connor Reese. Connor of the endless startup ideas. Connor, who once got kicked out of a charity poker event for screaming at a valet. Connor, who suddenly bought a boat last summer. I printed everything at FedEx the next morning instead of using the office printer. That detail feels pathetic now, but at the time it mattered enormously to me that nobody hear the machine running. A week later I found the email. Not because I'm brilliant. Because Andrew was careless. He forwarded the wrong attachment chain to accounting. Buried inside was an older thread between him and my father. Andrew. Claire's getting too deep into Hawthorne. My father. Then stop moving money like a drunk sophomore. That line hit harder than anything else. Not because it proved fraud. By then I already knew. It was the tone. Annoyed, routine, like they'd had versions of this conversation before. I went into the women's bathroom and locked myself in a stall. Not crying exactly, just breathing strangely. Somebody came in while I was sitting there. I could hear her fixing her lipstick and talking on Bluetooth about preschool pickup. Normal life continuing 5 feet away, while my understanding of my family basically slid sideways. I called my mother that night. I don't even know why. Instinct, maybe. She answered while unloading groceries. I could hear plastic bags crinkling. I asked whether Dad knew about Hawthorne. Long silence. Then, Claire. Your father has a lot of pressure on him right now. Which wasn't an answer. I said, so he does know. Another pause. Finally, your brother makes mistakes sometimes. Mistakes. Millions of dollars moved through shell vendors, and she called them mistakes. Then she asked if I was coming to Easter brunch. I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, because suddenly the whole family felt insane to me. Easter happened anyway. Of course it did. Ham, deviled eggs, my mother worrying about whether the rolls were getting cold. Andrew spent 20 minutes explaining cryptocurrency to our cousin's husband, who clearly wanted to die halfway through the conversation. At one point, my father asked me if I'd finalized the compliance review schedule. I said yes. He nodded approvingly, like we were still participating in the same reality. That was the strangest part of the entire year. How long everybody kept performing normal. I hired an attorney in Chicago 3 days later. Not Nashville, too interconnected. Her office overlooked the river and smelled faintly like burnt coffee. She read the documents quietly while I kept apologizing for talking too fast. Finally, she asked, "What outcome are you hoping for here?" I remember staring at her, because I genuinely didn't know. People imagine revenge gives clarity. Usually it doesn't. I wasn't trying to destroy my family. I wanted someone to explain how I was supposed to keep working beside people who smiled at me during meetings while hiding federal fraud inside vendor invoices. The investigation started slowly after that. Document requests, secure uploads, calls scheduled around business hours so nobody at the office noticed. Meanwhile, my father announced plans for a January succession dinner at the Hermitage Hotel. Formal transition, press coverage, Andrew becoming managing partner. When he told me, he actually squeezed my shoulder and said, "You'll finally have more support around here." I almost admired the delusion. By December, the investigators had enough documentation that things started feeling inevitable. That's different from satisfying. I barely slept, started forgetting stupid things. One afternoon, I left frozen groceries in the trunk for 6 hours. Eli asked once if I regretted reporting them. I said, "I don't know." He nodded like that answer scared him a little. The dinner happened during the first real snow of the year. Valet line backed up outside the hotel. Women carrying heels through slush. Somebody arguing with staff because their seating card disappeared. Inside, everything looked expensive in a tired way. Gold lighting, over-polished silverware, men pretending not to loosen ties after dessert. Andrew worked the room beautifully. That's important. He really did. Watching someone be charming while knowing exactly what they are is an exhausting experience. At one point, I saw him crouch beside an elderly investor's chair to hear her better over the music. 10 minutes later, he was drunk enough to start repeating stories. My mother kept fixing imaginary wrinkles on tablecloths whenever she got nervous. My father gave the same speech he always gave at company events. Hard work, discipline, stewardship, legacy. Half the room checked phones during it. Near midnight, I went to the bathroom and found one of our junior analysts crying quietly in a stall because her boyfriend had apparently gotten somebody pregnant. We stood there talking about men for maybe 4 minutes, while federal investigators were probably preparing warrants involving my family. Life doesn't build clean, dramatic atmospheres. It stacks disasters together and lets them breathe on each other. At 11:57, my attorney texted, "They're moving tonight." I just stared at the screen. No countdown, no cinematic moment. Somebody nearby dropped a champagne flute and cursed loudly. When midnight hit, the room erupted like every other New Year's party in America. Bad singing, hugging, people filming vertically. My father hugged Andrew first, not me. That shouldn't matter anymore at my age. Still did. Nothing happened immediately, that's the truth. For almost 20 minutes the party kept functioning. Then our general counsel disappeared from the ballroom after checking his phone. A few minutes later, 2 board members followed him out looking pale. Andrew noticed before my father did. You could see it happen. That awful moment when social instinct tells someone the room has shifted against them before facts arrive. He kept smiling too long. That's what I remember most. The delay. My father finally got pulled aside near the bar. He listened without interrupting once. Then he looked across the room at me. Not angry, not shocked, just old suddenly. Older than I'd ever seen him. Guests started leaving in weird waves after that. Excuses about weather, babysitters, early flights. One investor walked directly past Andrew, pretending not to notice him standing there. Social rejection gets physical very fast. By 12:40, the ballroom looked wrecked. Half-empty drinks, melted ice, somebody's lipstick-stained napkin on the piano. My mother sat alone at a table, twisting her wedding ring around and around without realizing she was doing it. I was putting my coat on when my father stopped me near the lobby. For a second, neither of us spoke. Then he said quietly, "You could have come to me." I almost answered automatically, almost slipped back into being the daughter who managed everybody's emotions for them. Instead, I asked, "Would you have stopped him?" He looked down at the marble floor, long enough that I got my answer before he spoke.